Hey everyone, today we will be creating a simple REST API using Prisma, Express, TypeScript, and SQLite. In this application, we're gonna have an author and a book model, and they're gonna share a relationship, a one-to-many relationship, meaning an author can have many books, and the book belongs to a single author. So tag along, and I will show you how it comes out. Let's start to set up our application. First, we're gonna install our dependencies. And after that, we will set up our TS config and everything else we will need to run the application. So first, I will create a new package and I will add Prisma/client. So we will need that. Now let's add some scripts that will help us run the application. So let's go to our package.json and we're gonna add a new field called scripts. And inside that, we're gonna have two. We're gonna have dev and we're gonna have migrate. So dev, the only thing it's gonna do is it's gonna run node.js for us. And that means every time we have a change in our application, node.js will rebuild our application, so you don't need to stop and restart your server. And the migration command, the only thing that's gonna do is it's gonna use Prisma to migrate our changes to the database. And now let's add our TS config. I will include this in the description, and you can also find it in the GitHub. That will be in the description. These are the settings I usually use. And now it's time to create our database. So we will use SQLite for this. So only thing we need to do is npx prisma init. You can use that flag. We can see they generated a Prisma folder for us, and inside that we have a schema.prisma file. So we will create our models for the application. So this can be a very simple application where we have only two models, but they will relate to each other. So we're gonna have an author and we're gonna have a book. And the relationship between the two is one-to-many, meaning an author can have many books, but a book can only have one author. The author will have an ID, and the default value for that just gonna be a random ID we generate. It's gonna have a name, and here comes the relationship part. So it will have a set of books which will relate to this. Now to the book part, here we will have the same. We will have an ID which is exactly the same. You ID, and you can have an author which will represent an author in relation. It means the author ID that we define in the next line will point to the actual ID of the author. And we can have a title for the book, and that's it. So it's fairly simple. Now let's apply these changes to the database. We will use our new script that we just created. So we just yarn migrate and enter a name for the new migration. So we just say init db. And if we go back, you will see created a migrations folder for us. It created our database too. And you can see the query that it ran. So it created our author and our book models. We are done with the database, at least for now. So next, we're gonna move ahead and create our actual Express server. So I will create a folder called source, and inside index.ts. Now here we're just gonna import Express. And we're gonna create a new instance. we're gonna set the port, process.env.port, meaning you can pass in the port in your .env file, but if you don't, we're just gonna fall back to 8080. And after that, because this is gonna be a REST API, so we're gonna deal with a lot of JSON, we're gonna set this and listen port and the callback, where we're just gonna log server up and running on port. So let's check if it works. We can run yarn dev and we get the message that server up and running, so that all works. But now let's actually check if it works. So let's create a test endpoint, a get endpoint, where we can go and just make sure that we can send the request and we get a response. So I'm gonna call it ping. It received the request and response, and it just sends a JSON response. Message will be pong, and also a status code of 200 to signal that everything is okay. Now we can test this multiple ways. Because it's a GET request, you can test it in the browser. So we can go localhost 8080/ping. So you see we get the response. But for this tutorial, we will use Postman because we will handle other requests too that you just can't do in the browser. So here we have the same request. We can send and we receive it. I will include this Postman collection in the repo, so if you want to follow along or anything and you want to test with me in Postman, then you can get it. But now that we made sure our server is working as expected, we can get started with the rest of the implementation. So in our source folder, I will create 2 new folders. One will be controllers. This is where we will store all the logic to actually interact with the database. And another one called routes. And inside the routes, we're just gonna make sure that the correct route is pointed to the correct controller. Meaning, if you want to get a user by ID, you don't actually delete it, and so on. So let's start with creating the author first, and then we add the book after. So I will create a new file called author.controller.ts. Now this is gonna be a really simple file. We're gonna import the Prisma client first, and we're gonna create author client, which is gonna be a Prisma client instance, and you get the author out from it. So this way we don't need to recreate on every request. And we're gonna have 5 methods in here. We're gonna handle all the basic CRUD operations for this. So meaning we're gonna have one for get all authors, meaning we get every single author we have in our database. Second, gonna be get author by ID, meaning we pass in the ID in our request and you get the author that has the same ID. If no author exists, then obviously we're not gonna return a random author or anything. We just return no match found 404. Then after those two, we're gonna create an author. So that will allow us to create authors on the fly. Next will be update author. And finally, if you can guess, this will display the delete author. So these are called CRUD operations, meaning this is a create, read, update, and delete. So let's get started with the get authors. I will first define get all authors. This is gonna be an async function. We get a request and response And after that, I'm gonna wrap everything in a try catch because it usually the best course of action. Let's start with error handling. If there are any errors in here, we can log it, right? So this will make our life easier. We need to now get all the authors. So let's create a new constant called all authors. And we're gonna use the author client. And there is a method called find many. So find many, what it does is, as you can see, find 0 or more authors that matches the filter. If you have 1,000 authors in your database, this will return 1,000 authors for you. Might be a bit slow, but we actually want to add one more thing. As I mentioned before, we have a relationship between our book and author. And with Prisma and with relational databases, what you can do is you can query multiple models at the same time. Because an author has a set of books, right? Meaning those books belong to this author. So for this tutorial, I will do this, that I want to include the books in the response. So with this, we will get all the authors out of the database and all the books they have. And once we have that, we're just gonna send the response. So 200, that everything went okay. And we're gonna send data, all authors. Now we can test this after we actually implement our routes. So let's start with that. So I will implement the author.router.ts file, and I'm gonna import router from Express. And gonna import get all authors from controllers, author controller. And now we're gonna define the author router, which gonna be the router we just imported. And we're gonna define author router.get. So on the route, and just call get all authors. And we need to export this router we just created. Now to use this, we're gonna go back to our main root file, and we're gonna import this newly created author router. Author router, as you can see, this might break. route/author router. Okay, and to use this, the only thing we need to do is app.use, and this will pass in two arguments for this. The first one will be a namespace, meaning if you leave it like this, then it will go localhost 8080, and then there you have your authors. But we don't want that because we're gonna have our author, the books. If you want to add more models, then you're gonna have more and more. So we want to keep them separate. These requests will have to go to the authors endpoint. And to show you what it means, again, we can go back to the browser. So we can go authors, and you see we have nothing in our database currently, but this works. So now we read from our database, we have nothing in there, but the route is matched correctly, even though, like here you can see we defined /authors, and in here just a single slash, the two combines together, if it makes sense. Now let's go back to our author controller, and let's add more of the functionality. So the get author by ID is gonna be fairly identical, but it's gonna have some changes. So here we're gonna have an author ID that we pass in the request URL. So then you can access it from the request params object. And then this is gonna be only a single author. And it's the find many, because now we only want one, because we believe that ID should be unique for an author. So we can now say find unique. And for that, we need to pass in where, and that will include our filter. So we're going to say where our ID equals to the author ID we passed in. And that should be it. Now I will finish the rest of this, and then we're going to tie in everything at the same time in the router. So now it's going to be the create author. Here we're not going to get anything, but actually I'm going to leave this in for now. We're not going to get anything in the request params, but we're going to receive the data we need in the request body. So that's the superpower of a post request, that you can pass in data. You can, every time you submit a form, you send a message somewhere, that's usually a post request, and the request body contains all your data. Instead of find unique, we're gonna say create. And here, what we pass in is the data that we need. And then it's just gonna be author data. And instead of 200, we're gonna return 201, meaning the post request, the model has been created in our database. Now next, let's handle the update author. This is similar to the previous two, the create author and get author by ID, because we get the new data that we will apply to our author, and we also get the ID, because we need to know which author do we need to update and what is the data we're going to apply to the author that we mentioned. So request the params.id, and here instead of create, as you might have guessed, we're going to use update. And again, we're going to leave the data. And if you remember just above, we had this where the ID was the author ID. We need to pass that in so we know which author to update with the new data. And after that, this is going to be back to 200. And finally, we're just going to do the delete author. That's going to be the simplest possibly. Delete author. And again, async, request, response, try, catch. So what we're going to do here again is we get the author ID from the params, because we need to know which author to delete. We don't want to randomize this or delete all authors. That might be a bit overkill. So we can call author client delete, which again will need the match, meaning which ID equals to the author ID. I have a typo. And after that's done, what we can do is send it 200. And I'm just gonna pass in an empty object, because we just deleted our author. Wouldn't be a bit confusing to still return it after. Now we can go back to our routes and add all the other methods we just created. So get author by ID, create author, update author, and delete author. And here, I'm just gonna do this. So the first two is gonna be a get request, but here this is gonna be the get author by ID, and this is how we get the ID from the request params. If you don't define this, the request params ID will be undefined. So it's very important to do this every time you want to pass in params to your request. Next will be a post request, and that we map to the create author. And then the last two will need the ID again. So this will be put, and that's gonna be the update author. This is gonna be delete author and delete request. And now it's time for some testing. So we just go to Postman and let's see, get all authors. Empty, just as we want. Now I have a request here, and we're gonna pass in, this is our request body that I talked about earlier. So we're gonna send, and we see that we have our author created in a database, has an ID. So now if we go back, check all authors, we have a match. Now we can check our author by ID. So I will press in this. Okay, it works. I receive a single. As you can see, this one returns an object, and inside, meaning there's a single item, and in here we get an array. So it works as expected. Now let's try to update our author. And let's press this in. This is our author ID that we need to pass in. And let's just say James cleared second. And we got our updated author. So if you go back again and check, you see that it's been changed. And now let's try to delete it. So send. Okay, no error or anything. So it seems to be deleted from the database. Let's try to fetch all authors again, and it's empty, meaning our author controller and routes working as expected. Now we can get started with the books. The book controller will be almost identical to the author controller with some very tiny changes. So I will just mainly copy paste. So we're gonna rename all books. Here, instead of author client, we're gonna have book client. And as I mentioned, some changes is gonna be one of them. So we're not gonna include relationships. So it's just gonna be the books as is. I'm just gonna change all author, get book, get book by ID. Gonna change some casing. I'm gonna remove the include from our get book by ID. And then we have create book. Like that. Book client.create. That looks so good. We still pass in the data we need to create a new book and save it in the database and then return it as a response. Update book, some casing mistake. But yeah, that looks good. So we update our book by the book ID we pass in, and with the new data we have delete book, all the same. So that looks good to me. So now we can do the same to our router. So in here we're gonna say book.router.ts, and here inside of author we're gonna say book controller. So get our books. I'm just gonna delete this. Get book by ID, create book, update book. It's a typo. And delete book. And let's fix this before I forget about it. Update book. Okay, and now this is gonna be book router. And in here, the same drill as before. So get all books, get book by ID with the ID we pass in, create a book, update the book, and delete book. And don't forget about it. We need to go back to our source, our main file, and we need to import our newly created book router, and also tell our app that use this router under the books endpoint. So let's see if it works, or I left some mistake in the copy paste. So get our books. Yep, we got an error, so let's check the log. Module not found. Yep, that never looks good. It says it's in our main. Oh yeah, it's this import is now resolving correctly, but now it should be good. Yep. Okay, so now we have no books as mentioned. So let's create a new book. So I'm gonna create an author again because we need an author to have a relationship with the book. So now we have an author ID. So we can create a book by passing in the author ID and the name of the book. And that already looks sinister. And there are some errors in here. And get the book data, that looks good. Book client.create. Oh yeah, I completely forgot, that's my bad. So what I need to do here is I need to pass in the title I need for the book from book data.title. And to map the relationship, what I need to do is I need to define the author. But I'm not just gonna do book data.author because that's not gonna actually connect the two models. The goal here is we connect our book to an existing author, right? And to do that with Prisma, the way you do it is you say connect, and you say the ID is the book data.author ID. So what this does is it goes and it maps the two models together, so they will be related after. So let's try again. And it's still timing out. Okay, I think I have more. Oh, it's I called it name instead of title. There, okay. Finally have it. So now we can go back to the books. Now you see we have atomic habits. Now let's check the relationship. So if we go back here and we fetch all authors, if you remember, we explicitly told that every time we fetch the authors, we also want to include all the books. And there you have it. So we have James Clear, and Atomic Habits is a book that belongs to him. So now let's check the book by ID, just to make sure that it works. So let's pass in the ID. Yep, seems to be working. Now let's update the book. So we pass in the ID. And here, title will be Atomic Habits. I don't know, 2. Send. Yep, that works. So let's go back again and check. Yep. And let's go and check how we can delete the book. So in here, ID deleted. Let's check again. Yep. So we have all the CRUD operations working for both authors and books. And that should be it. Let me know in the comment section if this was helpful or you want any specific topic to be covered on this channel. I am always out of ideas, so if you can help me, that's always a massive help. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you at the next one.